someone who's following the developments in the region and the access to new Islamic political groups, such as Ennahda, to power in Tunisia. From Dubai, what's your perception on Ennahda's experience so far in Tunisia?
Well, this is my third visit to Tunisia. This one and the last one after the revolution, the one before, prior. I remember when I first came to Tunisia, and I was working in Libya at the time, between Libya and Dubai, at a project in Libya. And I was coming to Tunisia, and everybody in Dubai, the UAE, was talking about the secular nature of Tunisia. And I spent some time in the Medina, and I went to Zaytun Mosque, and I prayed there. I'm not very good with my prayers, but I did on that occasion. And I talked to many people, and I saw many people, and I came away with an impression that this country and this city, Tunis, and the people I met were very conservative, and this was a very religious society. So what happened after the revolution with the rise of the Ennahda, I was not surprised. And I think people who were surprised were looking at the surface. And when you look under the surface, we know that it responds to the force above the surface. And if you're suppressing something, and that suppression goes away, there's a real force that comes up very suddenly. And that's what we've seen, and I've seen that from my perspective, and that support has come to the Ennahda. But of course, that initial thrust starts to dissipate. And I think what we've seen in Tunis, and the situation in other places is different, in Egypt, etc., is that people are starting to now assess, where is Ennahda? Because we did support it, and it has come into governance, and it has allowed for a transition that's been peaceful. But especially after the assassination of Shukri Balaid, the view that I have of Ennahda is one that's searching for its true role as a governing party in Tunis. It started as a transitional party caretaking of the post-revolutionary period. But I think it is very troubled in understanding now what it means to govern, what it means to govern inclusively, and what it means to govern conclusively. And in the transitional period, they made a critical flaw in mistaking the mandate, in my opinion. The mandate for transition is a mandate for governance. And it may well be that Ennahda wins the next election as a mandate for governance. But that mandate hasn't started yet. We're in a transitional period. And the key question will be is, when they have that mandate for governance, will it be inclusive? Will it be conclusive in terms of delivering services and results? And that would be the question. It's one thing to talk about the Justice and Development Party, the AK Party in Turkey. They did incredible things, even though there are, of course, drawbacks to their approach and tensions today. But achieving those results is no easy matter. And the proof will be in the pudding. You can't just have rhetoric. But let me just say that if you're in the opposition, and let's say the opposition after the transitional period will be secular, predominantly secular and liberal parties, and the governing coalition will be Islamist in nature of some sort, the Ennahda Party being in the leadership. You can choose not to engage. You can say, I'm not going to be part of a coalition government. I'm going to be the official opposition in a parliamentary system and provide opposition. But if you choose to undermine the state, obstruct the state, meaning obstruct the system, well, that's a choice that I don't think can be positive for the country. And that's the difficulty I think people have in the development of this new politics. That yes, it will be the obligation of the Islamists, if they win the election, to deliver. And I think deliver quickly. And the jury will be out. Can they do that? Like I said, can they govern? Can they govern effectively? But at the same time, if they are governing ineffectively, the opposition will have to wait 4 years until the next election to elect a new government. And so the accommodation with the Islamists, and people have completely mistaken what's going on. The Islamists and secularists are not going to become one. Forget it. That's not the answer. That's not the approach. This is a failure of everybody's approach to this issue. This is not about Islam. It's okay for them to be different. When they converge on particular, let's say, economic policies or social policies, they will advance a policy agenda. They should all pursue evidence-based policy making. But there will be philosophical differences on the nature of the state, the nature of the system, the nature of governing, the nature of society, and those will be there. And the electorate will have to choose what we would like and what we would not like, as long as certain principles and rights are safeguarded, as would be in the Constitution for minorities, for freedoms, etc. But beyond that, it's not about the two coming together in some type of magical fantasy. It's about having a system that works, that alternates power, that transitions power to the will of the people.
Do you feel that the fact that we did an election to create a constituent assembly to write a new constitution was a good move, while we've seen people's uprising first for jobs and the economy, knowing that this process of writing a new constitution is slowing down the much needed reforms to bring in jobs and economic growth?
For sure. It's definitely a difficult choice, but it's the only choice, and I think it's the right choice. You must go to school before you work. You must get training before you get a job. That's the reality of it. And ultimately, if you don't, you may get some income in the near term, but you will really lose out in the long term. And you might even lose out in the near term as well, because you have no effective governance. You know, we know that the most dire economic threat is state failure. State failure is what can really undermine the entire economic system. And I think what we've seen in Tunisia is, while there's difficulties, that things haven't deteriorated. They've stabilized. Now, you haven't had the amelioration of the country and its conditions, which was really the impetus for the Tunisian Spring. But you're laying the foundation for that. Now, what does that mean? You cannot take forever to lay this foundation. So the elections need to happen this year. The constitution needs to be passed. And the biggest mistake that people have made in all these Arab countries, when you elect a constitutional assembly, they're going to be the caretaker government for the 1 year period or 1 to 2 year period, and so make policy changes, but not necessarily drastic ones. And they're going to appoint, I would say, a constitutional commission of elders. And I would do it in the way that you take these 100 people that get selected by this assembly and do what they do with the Pope. Lock them in a room, give them a transcriber, and 3 weeks later they come out with a consensus constitution that gets put to a referendum. And that's it. Putting all this into the public debate and having all these discussions, you have created a dynamic where each element gets politicized and there's no consensus. Things are being done in a majoritarian way. Whereas in the transitional period, you want the constitution to be founded by consensus. So we all respect the rules of the game going forward. When we do want to make these big policy changes, we do want to create economic policy. And you can't lose your eye off the ball. I mean, let's take, for example, travel to Egypt. Why is there only one flight a day? Why do Egyptians need to get visas? How can this be positive for tourism, for trade, for investments, for labor migration? This is a disaster. So that's a policy you can change. And I think somewhere along the lines, each of these countries need to appoint some type of effectiveness and competency commission that simply goes through the country and says, this is ineffective and incompetent. Let's fix the system and the bureaucracy. Nobody will argue with that. That's not a drastic policy change. That just makes the country work better. And I think you can do that in the interim. That would be my response to kind of the dynamics. I think there's been a lot of lack of thinking about this current transition in Egypt, in Yemen. People are just going. Elections is just one dimension. It's a very misleading to think, oh, I had an election, now I'm democracy. I run a class on comparative politics, and I ask my students, what is democracy? And by the end of the class, we have 30 definitions on the board for what democracy is. Only one of them is elections. So all these other things you have to work on and think about. In a transitional period, you really have to think about them. How are you effective? Okay, fine, I elected people in the Constitutional Assembly. So what? Are these people legal experts and constitutional experts? Are they the elders of society? Do they represent every voice? Why shouldn't you have a musician on there? Why shouldn't you have an artist on there? Why shouldn't you have 3-4 religious figures? Why shouldn't you have a Jewish figure on there, for example? Because you want the collection of society and those diverse views to come together and say, what is what we agree on the rules of the game? I'm going to be on opposing teams. I know this. You'll be trying to score one up. But we know what the dimensions of the field is and where the goalposts are. Yeah, we're going to play, we're going to battle, etc. And there'll be a referee. We know the rules. We agreed on them. And where we are in Tunisia and other places is nobody agreed on this field. Nobody agreed on the referee. How are you going to play? You're already playing. You're playing everywhere. The ball's going everywhere. No one knows what's out of bounds. And that's why you see the dysfunction and confusion. because nobody defined these things. And that's critical. In the next few months, these need to be defined. Everybody needs to agree and then go at it. Islamists, secularists, liberals, social capitalists, whatever the movements come. But define the base rules of the game. That is essential everywhere.